this life ain't fair. And I know that you're going nowhere. Well, don't blame me for what you've done, because I know that you are having fun.
Welcome to the Clarified Realty Podcast, exposing the real estate secrets your agent doesn't want you to know. Here's your host, Tom Clary.
Well, don't you just walk away. That's when I'll say.
Welcome to Clarified Realty Podcast. I'm Tom Clary. I'm a real estate agent licensed here in lovely Los Angeles, California, although sort of rainy Los Angeles, California today. Thanks so much for coming back. Bruno is here with me as usual. Ron, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Tom.
Good. So we're actually recording this on Friday the 20th, Inauguration Day. I think that's probably the biggest news story of the day. I'm not going to go too deeply into it. If you want to hear my general thoughts about what effect a Trump presidency is going to have on the real estate market, you should go check out back to episode 7. But we did hear some news today right out of the gate that's pretty much backs up everything I was thinking. Ron, why don't you go ahead and give everybody kind of a background on what kind of went down today?
Sure. So the Federal Housing Administration, FHA. So we're all familiar with FHA loans.
Right. First-time home buyer, basically.
First-time home buyer, as well as potentially challenge credit or putting down lower amount for a down payment, 3.5%, even for a 2 or 3 or 4-plex property. Before Obama left office, about 10 days ago, he put forth new legislation where the FHA was going to reduce their mortgage insurance premium. Right. So when you think of a mortgage insurance premium, there are two different aspects to mortgage insurance when it comes to an FHA loan. You first have a upfront mortgage insurance premium, which is 1.75% of the loan amount.
Right.
And that can be financed into the loan.
Right.
And then you have monthly mortgage insurance.
Right.
And what the FHA does is and this happens with all mortgage insurance, but what you do is they have a factor where you take the loan amount times a factor of, and in 2015, it was reduced to 85 basis points, so 0.85. So you take that factor, you multiply that by 0.85, and you get your mortgage insurance premium. So for a $400,000 FHA loan, that would equate to $283
Per month.
Obama, before he left office, said we're going to reduce it by a quarter. So now we're going to take it from 0.85 to 0.60, and the impact would be where you would actually have a mortgage insurance per month from $283 down to $200.
Right.
So it was an $83 savings.
It gave you a little bit of room. So basically, with the rates starting to kind of creep up a little bit, it kind of offset it a little bit.
And that's what a lot of people saw it as, right? So they saw it as, oh, okay, so rates have gone up by 50 basis points or 0.5%. Well, this is a nice little relief, right? So people that were pre-approved for homes at a certain level, and now they reach their threshold, and now they have to lower their expectations because they were only pre-approved for a certain amount. With that FHA premium going down, now they actually have a little bit more wiggle room.
Right.
So what was interesting today was, so the past 10 days, the whole industry, they were getting excited about it, right? So there were a lot of lenders and realtors, and it was all over social media. Go ahead and refi, right away. Do a streamline refi.
And it's totally understandable because we were looking at basically the climbing interest rates as a dampening on our industry. That basically it's going to get people to go less and less out looking at houses. But look at this! There's a knight on a white shining horse, or shining knight on a white horse, coming in to kind of go, okay, well let's kind of fudge a little here and there and make it so that it kind of cancels each other out.
That's right. So what happened is there were a lot of people out there. They were trying to, they were excited by this opportunity, and they started locking loans and originating loans. Well, what's happening now is, so day one, Trump takes office. His new housing secretary, Ben Carson, made the decree that they are vetoing that particular bill.
Right.
So they just put the kibosh on the FHA reduction in the mortgage insurance premium.
Right. So I think that Ron and I have two different kind of viewpoints about what's going on here. It's kind of a point counterpoint kind of thing, and that's what, somewhere the truth is in between, is what I said to Ron when we were kind of chatting about this before we started recording. And I'm going to let Ron, I want Ron to hear. I want Ron to basically, what do you think your 2 cents is? What's going on here?
So if I go to the extreme, and this isn't supposed to be a political discussion, but if I look at it from an extreme right position, you could almost see it as Obama placed a poison pill so that he would trump on day one by saying, okay, I am going to save millions of Americans and we're providing housing relief. I'm going to go ahead and put that in days before Trump takes office. And then now that Trump takes office, I know he's going to veto it, but it's going to make him look like a jerk, right? It's not going to make him be put in the right light on day one. And
basically, and by the way, I think that our two opinions can actually coexist. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily think that it could very well be an FU from Obama on his way out, because he knows that basically there's no way that Trump's going to do this, and it's going to make him look awful on his way out. I can totally see that. But here's the thing about my opinion. So look, I think this just confirms what I spoke about in episode 7 and what I've been saying kind of all along. It's my suspicion from watching the cabinet appointments and from the comments that I've heard from some of the, wizards behind the curtain, Trump's been gathering around him, or, we're already there before, most, notably like Steve Bannon and Paul Ryan. It's my suspicion that we're about to experience what I'm calling the Great Rollback. So basically, now what do I mean by that? Well, after the Great Depression, we were given FDR's New Deal, right? It set up things like Social Security and this regulatory safety net for those Americans that they sometimes hit different speed bumps in their life, and we all paid into it. So when we needed it, we just assumed like Social Security, welfare, Medicare, they're going to be there, right? I mean, they've been around so long, we've just accepted that they were like permanent fixtures, like, American institutions, Washington Monument or Mount Rushmore, right? So I'm starting to think not so much. I think that even if some of these things survive, they're going to look nothing like what we had before. I've heard things that Steve Bannon says about, tearing the entire system down. Paul Ryan is a big follower of Ayn Rand, whose basic philosophy of objectivism is, look, it's not only my prerogative to get mine, but I have no issue with yours, right? If you fail, it's on you. You put those two things together, and we're talking about an America that we haven't seen since around the 20s and 30s. It's interesting. During one of the cabinet hearings this week, which was a circus with all the, certified, and by the way, this is not, like Ron said, this is not a political thing here, but even Republicans have to look at what happened over this past week and just see the certifiably unqualified nominees and just outright craziness that we saw. The nominee for Health and Human Services, it's Tom Price, I think it is. He was being grilled by Bernie Sanders about healthcare, and he said, America is a compassionate country. And Bernie interrupted him, and he said, no, we're not. And that interchange, it kind of made me stop and think for a second. Are we really a compassionate country? Are we as citizens compassionate? In general, there's philanthropy and people donate to various charities. And for the most part, we try not to be jerks to one another, right? But are we systematically compassionate? If left to our own devices, is capitalism compassionate? I'm not so sure, but I will say this for certain. It's about to get a whole lot less compassionate. That this is one of this was one of this administration's very first moves out of the gate is incredibly telling to me, and it's going to have a remarkable effect on housing, in my opinion. They are basically saying, hey guys, you've had it nice for the last 80, 90 years. You've had programs that help you out and help get you into houses, but those days are gone. We might just go one by one through these federal programs to get first-time, those programs to get first-time home buyers into houses, and we're just going to dismantle them. It's going to be survival of the fittest. If you can't get into a house on your own without someone giving you a little bit of a leg up, sorry, tough luck. And this could have a cooling effect on the entire housing market, especially on the lower end. I mean, what does it mean to buyers and sellers? Well, if you're a buyer, if you are on your second or third house, it's not going to mean as much. But if this is your first purchase and you're trying to get into your first condo or your first fixer, I mean, your buying power probably just took a hit. You can afford a whole lot less. If you're a seller and you're selling a condo or a starter home, your audience, the people who can potentially purchase your property, just got quantifiably smaller. Less demand, more supply, prices go down. So we're going to keep our eyes on this, but I'd have to say I'm concerned about what it will do to cool off the market. But my suggestion, if you're thinking about buying and it's your first time, I would do it now. Do not wait. We don't know what's going to go next. Interest rates have started to rise, and who knows what program is going to be the next on the chopping block. If you're selling and your property is in the price range of let's say, a first-time home buyer or someone else that needs a federal program to qualify, get it on the market now. You can't afford to wait. That's my 2 cents. So anyway, Ron, do you have any last thoughts on that?
No, I think you spelled it out pretty nicely. I think the biggest thing is everything is going to be questioned.
Yeah.
And I really think the key is to have your trusted advisors, your realtor, your lender, your financial advisor, and to really stay in touch with them, because things are going to change on a fairly frequent basis.
At the very least, this is going to be the most interesting 4 to 8 years or more. And we just, you're going to need to rely on someone who is in the know even more than ever. And that's, I think, the real thing that we need to get to really communicate to you guys today. Right now, this is their first step out of the gate. What's next?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of the things I remember in business school, the Harvard Business Review and the Harvard case studies. And this is going to be a very interesting case study from the standpoint where you essentially have consultants and industry experts and industry insiders are part of Trump's cabinet.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of political experience.
Yeah.
So finding that balance, I think, can be a good thing, right? I think that can be a positive thing, but it's also going to be pretty interesting to pay attention to it.
Well, and I think that also on top of it, if you look at the people that are bringing, when you have Rick Perry as the Secretary of Energy, he literally in his debates were talking, that was the one that he forgot, was the Department of Energy, that he forgot, I don't forget which department I would destroy, right? So if you're bringing that person in as the person who's going to be the head of it, I don't see how you can take anything else from it other than we're going to destroy the Department of Energy. I don't see, and everything else, this federal kind of artifice that we've built, in Washington, D.C., they're going to try to pare it down to the absolute minimum. And what does that take? Well, that takes taking out programs that are supposed to be assist the market. They are purist and capitalist purist at heart. And these things are going to go the way of the dodo bird. And you need to be able to either act now before they go away or have a consultant who can definitely, help you through the maze. So that's, I think we've belabored that point, but I think that that's something that everybody should be watching out for. Look, I said back in episode 7, I didn't know what the heck's going to go on. But we're seeing these trial balloons go up, and this is kind of what I'm starting to see. So, hey, I'll be perfectly happy to change my story if later on that's not it. Look, what I told you at the very beginning in episode 1, I'm going to tell you guys the absolute truth. That is one of my commandments. So, if I have to say that I'm changing my mind, I'm going to tell you I'm changing my mind, because that's the truth. I don't have any kind of shame in coming back and saying, I don't know. No, I don't know. I don't know what's going on right now. And anybody who tells you that they do know, they're completely charlatans. You need to understand they're charlatans. They are not people that you should be doing business with, because they don't know either. Anyway, Moving on. So I am going to bring in my guest now. It's Veto Ruiz. How are you, sir? He's been.
How you doing? Thank you.
I want to talk about Veto. We had Veto on the podcast, believe it or not, before. You're like probably scrolling through your menu now and saying, "I don't see this anywhere." Well, we had him on, but in the infancy of the podcast, and I completely. I'll blame it on the board.
It was the equipment.
It was the equipment. The equipment completely screwed up, but I'm so glad to have Veto back. Thank you so much for coming back.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Just give you a little introduction about Veto. He's been in the escrow business since 1993.
If you count being a receptionist, yes.
It counts.
As an officer since '96.
As a receptionist, I think you probably see a lot of things. So
yeah,
you probably learn a lot.
Everything. That's right.
Yeah, and but you started being an escrow officer in 1996, then.
Right.
So that it's been a nice. Long time. You've been an escrow officer. He's been with Glen Oaks Escrow since 2001.
Right.
So you've been around the escrow block quite a few times, and he's very knowledgeable about the entire process. And I'm just so glad to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Good to be here.
So why don't we start off with just a kind of a brief discussion about how you made the move? Like, what were you doing before? How did you move into escrow?
Well, I went to UCLA. Actually, graduated with a BA in psychology, which
nice.
Actually does help in day-to-day life now and then. But
I would assume that there are a lot of psyches that you need to kind of salve and calm as you go through the process,
including my own. But after that, I was pretty much sick of school and wanted to start working, and so was looking for a job. A family friend was an escrow officer, and she said, "Hey, we have an opening for a receptionist. It's nothing fancy. You're answering the phones and helping around the office." And I really didn't have any other prospects at the time, so I took it, and I'm glad I did, because I learned about a industry that's always changing, always moving, and very interesting. I've loved it ever since. So
absolutely,
it was a fortunate circumstance that got me into escrow.
That's great. And, just to kind of, let's start off, I think escrow is one of the most misunderstood processes of the entire real estate process. So why don't we talk a little bit about what exactly is escrow? Right. Who is it for? So let's start off. Who is an escrow for?
Well, basically, if you're having any sort of transaction with real estate or a loan, if you're refinancing, if you're purchasing, or if you're selling, you have to have an escrow. We're basically a neutral third party that holds the funds, acts as a neutral third party between the principals involved. For example, if there's any disputes, we hold the money until there's some sort of resolution between the two sides. And we're kind of like a buffer between the principals, so that everybody's wishes come true through the transaction.
Right. And we'll get to this a little bit later about the neutrality and how important that is to the whole process. And it's kind of, you're the person that if things start to go pear-shaped, basically, and not so good, you've got control of the funds, and so it just doesn't, people aren't just taking things and moving things around and all that. Right.
It's since we're holding the funds, it's in everyone's interest to work together, basically, to come to some agreements so that it doesn't escalate to anything further. And so that's usually what happens. Whenever there's a dispute, it almost always gets resolved within the transaction, and so that you don't have to go through a legal process or anything like that.
Right. Now it's my understanding it's required on all real estate purchases in California, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Right. So basically, you've kind of talked a little bit about that. That escrow officers are neutral third parties. So, what happens if, let's say, one of my clients goes rogue? Instead of going through me, generally speaking, it's always helpful that if, as a client, as someone who's trying to buy a house or sell a house, you're bringing on an agent to basically, they're an agent of yours. They're basically standing in your shoes. They're representing you. So any kind of communication, it's always helpful when you go through the agent, because basically they're going to be able to be able to translate any kind of, the standard vocabulary of real estate. And so basically, when I talk to an escrow agent, we're talking the same language, basically. Mm-hmm. But what if they go rogue and they decide, well, you know what, I'll just call my escrow officer and just see what he has to say, and what does he think I should do? Mm-hmm. What happens in those circumstances?
We can always we try to help in any way we can. We can give advice to a certain point, and personally, I like to give advice or things to think about from different angles, so that you're not directing them to one specific place. You're giving them all the options and to consider them, and then to also go back to their agent, discuss it with them as well, because we don't want to leave them out of the loop.
Right. And I'm assuming that you can't have a lien at all that gives them any kind of preferential advice.
Right.
LEAN, correct?
Yeah.
That's funny.
When I hear lien, I'm thinking tax lien.
When we've been reduced to real estate puns, I think the podcast has jumped the shark. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the...
Same thing popped in my head.
Yeah. So anyway, but you can't have a lien towards a preference.
Right. You can't specifically direct them to any one place, or it's just a mistake to do that. You want to give them different points of view, so that they can consider it all and make the best choice for themselves.
Right. So, so in terms of that, you would also, and I would guess assume, almost like you would have to have some sort of a level of confidentiality at that point too, because if you're going to be neutral, then both sides can't know what the other side's doing, basically, right?
Right. Yeah. We can. Right. You have to keep, if you're, you can't divulge one side's particular information to the other, unless you have the other side's permission, of course. But you can speak with them on things that pertain to both sides, that they, for instance, if they both have to sign the same document, you can explain it to both of them. Mm-hmm. But as far as things like, a seller's particular net proceeds or anything that pertains specifically to them, you can't divulge it to the other side, right? Yeah, it's kind of like a doctor. You're
or priest,
right? All that stays with you, and you can't let that out.
Right. So okay, well, now that we've kind of gone as a general kind of description of the escrow period, why don't we take it kind of let's drill down into the steps that basically a valid escrow takes. All right. So we'll just say Joe and Jill Smith, they just, they've got an accepted offer on a house, because it doesn't happen. This escrow doesn't begin until the day after you basically have an accepted offer on a house. So why don't we take, literally go down through the steps of what a valid escrow is. So what would be the first step?
Right. So once an offer is accepted, we typically receive a copy of the contract and all the amendments or counters that are involved. We then issue an escrow number, and we can open up the escrow. We absolutely need to get a deposit, because that's a big crucial part of opening an escrow. You technically don't have an open escrow until you have funds deposited. The
actual money in the account. Now, it's just for a little bit of the real estate parlance. It's called the EMD. It's the earnest money deposit. It's generally in California, at least, and the general status here is that it's 3% down, basically. And so the question is. That's the kind of the deposit of that kind of that's the starter's gun that gets everything started. Is there a good way to? One of the things I keep on having clients ask me is, well, what's the best way to get the EMD into escrow?
Well, a wire is always best, because it's quick. It's good funds automatically as soon as we receive it. There's no holds. As soon as you send it from your bank and it goes to us, it's automatically good funds. There's no types of holds on it or anything like that. We do, of course, accept cashier's checks and even personal checks, but we're trying to stay away from those. We try and push a wire transfer as much as possible, because for that reason.
I hate to interrupt. Sorry. There's been issues with wire fraud, though, hasn't there?
Yeah. Very much. In fact, there's all kinds of new procedures we have to go through. For example, if we're emailing our wire instructions to somebody, it's always preferred to email them directly to the buyer or directly to the person that's sending the money. Because if you send it via an agent or a mortgage broker or anybody else,
right,
there's always a possibility it can get
intercepted,
email can get hacked, it can get intercepted, and we've seen this a lot recently. Is where they do get intercepted, the wire instructions are altered so that when the buyer wires their funds, it's going to some other account somewhere, who knows where, and their money's gone, and it didn't get to the escrow company. So,
would it be like, I'm just thinking out loud here, if when they go to the bank to do their wire transfer, is it best to maybe like literally as they're standing there call escrow and say, this is the number of the account? Is that correct?
Right. That happens. Yeah, that happens very often, and also, after we email out our wire instructions to the buyer, we call them and talk to them directly and say, hey, we sent you our wire instructions, and we confirm that the account numbers, the routing numbers, everything that like that with them over the phone, so that everything jives and there's no no hacking going on.
This actually just happened to me. I have I closed 2 loans this week, so that was very exciting.
Yeah, let's give Ron a round of applause. Two loans.
So and they both were purchases. But yesterday, the client, they had a Midwestern bank. So they needed to wire the funds. So they were signing loan docs in the evening, which is typically when the buyers would receive their wiring instructions. But they needed to wire ahead of time. So we had to give them wiring instructions ahead of time, and because escrow had sent it to us, because it was kind of a last minute thing, they sent it over. I then emailed it to the borrower. I got him on the phone and I said, we're going to go over this one by one.
Right.
We're going to read all of these numbers. And he really appreciated that.
No, absolutely.
So I kudos to Veto for pointing that out when you mentioned that on the last time we were talking, because I mean, they really appreciate that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about serious money.
Yeah, absolutely.
People don't want to lose their money, especially on an important transaction like buying property.
Absolutely. So, all right. So the next step after that would be escrow instructions, or?
Yeah. We get the contract, have the deposit. We've already probably at that point drafted our escrow instructions. We send it out to the agents.
What do they include? What does that include?
The escrow instructions are basically an adjunct. They supplement the purchase contracts. So there's nothing new or different than what you're going to see in your purchase contract. It's just the instructions from the principals to escrow that we're going to handle the escrow and follow the terms of the contract as the contract is stated. So it's a supplement to the purchase contract.
What would you see in it that, I mean, if it's not necessarily what is not in the residential purchase agreement, what else would you see that would be different slightly?
The only thing different you're going to see are just what we call general provisions that pertain to the escrow company and our duties. And right now our general provisions are about 9 pages long. They used to be maybe 2. But escrow instructions for the most part are just the general provisions that are attached to every set of escrow instructions. Other than that, you're just stating the property address, the purchase price, things that are information that's right from the purchase contract.
Another big piece of that is when you receive the EMD, that's usually when escrow wakes up, right, and starts the process. The loan officer, they need those fees, right? So they need what the closing costs are, and we're not able to disclose unless we have that, and we can't even order the appraisal unless everything has been disclosed to the buyer. So what I'm asking, and this usually happens when I have an agent and they say, okay, so typical closing is going to be 45 days. We want you to do it in less than 30. Okay, but if we're gonna be on an aggressive timeline, that means you need to notify the listing agent to light the fire with escrow to get the closing cost estimate out same day. It could even be before the EMD is wired, and I mean that's part of having a relationship, just so that we're able to put it together and put that into our loan estimate, right? Which we talked on other episodes. But that's a critical piece in getting started. I had an agent this week where they actually built it into the contract where they had a 3-day head start. So I don't know if you've ever seen that,
I've
Tom,
not seen that, no.
But yeah, there's a section where it says, and apparently these are common in commercial deals, but you build it in where you have a 3-day head start before escrow starts.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you have the agreement and it's signed off on, but the days of escrow don't start until that 3 business days or 3 days, which I thought was pretty brilliant.
That's actually smart. Yeah. And by the way, and let me interject here, just, it's also, it's why I think that I'm lucky that Ron is here. I mean, so many, and why it was important for me to have Ron be the co-host here on this podcast is that so many of the things that we deal with as we go through the real estate process somehow tie back to mortgages and tie back to how it relates to the loan. So it's always good to have that voice coming in and letting us know that, hey, listen, in terms of having your loan, you're going to want to get on this. Even if we're talking about escrow, even if we're talking about title, even if we're talking about other things, it's incredibly important because it goes back to basically when it comes down to it, the mortgage arriving in escrow at that last day, that's what you want. So anything that ties up that happening and makes that happen later screws everything up.
Right.
So
that's right. If you want a 10-day loan contingency or a 15-day and you want to rush the entire process, everybody has to.
So if you're
rush.
listening to this and going, why the hell is Ron still there? Well, that's why the hell Ron is still here.
Before TRID and CFPB escrow, we had at least a week or two before we had to think about fees or any of that. But now,
and we could order the appraisal day
Right,
one. We
right.
didn't have to disclose anything before
Right.
collecting the credit card information.
and now as soon as it opens, we're getting fees from title. We're putting an estimate together. That's one of the first things we do because we don't want to hold up the process at all.
So going back to the escrow instructions, so they're basically how do you go about just basically compiling everybody's needs basically? I mean, in terms of one side wants this, the other side wants this, and making sure that everybody's got that it makes one coherent
Right.
escrow instructions.
Well, you definitely have to read through the purchase contract and all the counters. It can, if you have multiple counters or addendums, it can get
Yeah.
confusing as to what's staying and what's going and what's agreed and what's not.
Right.
So you have to get all that straight. And then...
And it is actually a contract in itself, isn't it? The
Right.
escrow instructions. I mean, you're both signing off on it.
Right. You're instructing the escrow holder to perform our duties according to the contract and make sure everything gets done the way everybody wants to. I like to speak with the principals as well, just to go over everything and make sure everybody's on the same page and there's no confusion.
Got it. So anything else at this stage?
No, we send out the opening packages to each side, and again, that includes the escrow instructions, a statement of identity, which is confidential information that the title company needs, what insurance company you're going to go through if you know that at that time. Just an opening package is the basics before you start getting into the meat of the transaction.
Right. So the next step for you is it preparing the deeds, or what is it?
We prepare the deed when it opens, at least I do. We may not know the exact spelling of the buyers or how they're going to hold title, but that's something that can always be fixed later.
Right.
As long as we have a deed that's original, signed by the seller, notarized, we can always go back and fix exactly how the buyers are going to take title.
Got it. And that's vesting, basically.
Right.
How you're going to vest it.
Yeah, down to the spelling of their name and whether they're married or unmarried or single or
Right.
whatever it's going to be.
And by the way, the way that you vest your property has a real impact on several things. Most notably, that if anyone should pass, basically, if there's a big difference between joint tenants with right of survivorship and other things. So you've got to make sure that when you do vest, you're making sure that you talk to someone who's estate planner, or I always recommend talking to an estate planner.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just going to be joint tenants, or if you're going to be what's the
Community property.
There's all these different types of vesting, and it's always best to know. And there's also tax impacts as well in terms of how one is vested compared to another one.
Right. Yeah. One of the forms in our opening package is the vesting form, where we're asking them, how do you want to hold title? And the second page of that is it's a full page of just describing all the different ways you can hold title, what the differences are, so that they can make an informed choice.
Got it.
Yeah, you also want to throw in there is a trust, right? So if you have
Right.
kids and you don't have the actual plan and you have a right or survivorship and something happens to both both spouses, then what could happen is the property goes into probate,
Yeah.
right? Which is a very expensive, pretty awful
Absolutely.
experience.
Look, I will actually, in basically full disclosure here, my wife is an estate planning attorney, and I have quite a bit of knowledge in this kind of arena. And the interesting thing is, you hear these horror stories about literally, somebody who's in their 40s, 50s having a heart attack, thinking there's always time that I'm going to do my estate plan, get that started. And because of the vesting, which is what we're talking about here, you have these problems where basically a probate is if there's no will, if there's no trust, basically. And so you go in front of a judge and the judge decides who gets what. And you always want to try to avoid that. So that's why vesting is so important, because that should automatically tell who gets what, so that if there is no will, if there is no trust, there's a way for a judge to go, oh, you vested this way, this is the way it should be divided up. So that's why it's incredibly important to get some sort of legal representation, and even before you start the whole process of at least in the middle of the process, have an attorney look at it and say, I advise you to go this way because of this and that, however you have, whatever your assets are, whatever you got.
And you could also close on the property and then put it into the trust. Right. So you don't have to be in escrow and all of a sudden say, oh my gosh, I got to get the trust.
And basically the difference between what we're talking about, the difference between probate and a trust, if you've put your property into a trust, it's like a third party, this fictional third party that is holding that, so that it can completely bypass the court system. And you don't have to get involved with a judge. You don't have to get involved with probate. The trust is the owner of the house, and it dictates who gets what. So we'll go deeper into that when we're actually going to have my wife, Julie, on. She's going to come on one day.
Oh, that'll be fun.
I know,
I'm excited.
right?
Yeah.
I can razz her the entire time whenever she, I'll just sit there and go.
She did a great job. I remember we had her on the panel when we did that with the PGA.
At the Producers Guild, and she knocked it out of the park. So anyway, we'll have her on a little bit later. So but anyway, yes, going on about vesting. So moving on to the next thing. So basically you have the grant deed, you have the trust deed, right?
Right. Right. The grant deed is a conveyance from the previous owner or the seller to the buyer. That's the deed that changes title. A trust deed is the mortgage, basically, or the loan that gets recorded.
Right. So basically, you're you may think that you're the owner of that house, but at the end of the day, the mortgage company
it's my house.
It's actually Ron's house. Basically, they are the ones who have the trust deed, and they basically hold it. Actually, a third party holds it, but they in case you decide, oh, you know what, I'm not so interested in making payments anymore, they are basically going to come in and they're going to say, with this trust deed, we actually have the right to take over this house and sell it and make up the money that they basically said they were going to pay us.
Right. Exactly. You are the owner on record, but in reality, whoever the mortgage holder is the owner.
Right. It's very much like even like with a car. They have the mortgages. I'm sorry. The banks have to have a way to repossess the house. So that's what you have the grantee that basically says the seller now gives that property to the buyer, and then you have the trustee that basically says this person owes us money, and if they don't pay it, we have a right to take over the house.
And by the way, banks don't really like owning homes, right?
No.
They don't like that process. They don't like displacing
they like
borrowers.
collecting payments.
Yeah.
They like collecting payments. Absolutely. And that's why there's guidelines, right?
Yeah.
There's the reasons why they have these guidelines in place. They want to make good loans.
Yeah. So, and then there's, as part of that process, there's the documentary transfer tax.
Right.
Why don't you go just a little bit into that?
Sure. Whenever you're selling a piece of property, there's a tax levied upon the seller. The seller typically pays this transfer tax. There's a county transfer tax, and sometimes there's a city transfer tax. For example, for Los Angeles City, you get hit twice. There's a county transfer tax of $1.10 per thousand, and then a city transfer tax of $5.50 per thousand. So you're looking at $6.60 per thousand total if you're in city of LA, which, based off the purchase price, can be quite a good hit there.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe something that folks don't think about when they're first getting started on this whole thing.
Right.
It's one of these kind of fees that comes out of nowhere that nobody's on commercials on TV telling you about
Right.
the documentary transfer tax, and then all of a sudden you see this thing show up on your ledger and you go, what the heck is that?
And it can be several $1,000s
Yeah.
depending on what you're selling your property for.
So something to definitely be looking out for. Okay, then what about title insurance?
Title insurance is, again, there's a title company that's involved. They do the title search, and they're the ones that are issuing the title insurance. There's typically two policies. There's an owner's policy, which goes to, or that's for the owner, for the buyer, the new owner. And then there's this lender's policy that is for the loan, the mortgage. And that is insurance for the lender for their loan. So there's two policies there.
Right.
The lender's policy is paid for by the buyer because they're the ones obtaining the loan. And the owner's policy is usually paid for by the seller for the benefit of the buyer.
Right. Now, and just in terms of the roles that the title insurance plays and escrow, does escrow actually look through the chain of title to see if there's any conflicts or?
We do. We like to know, the chain of title is like a story. It kind of tells you, who's owned it, who's come off and on a title, and it gives you a background of the property.
Right.
So that's something that we like to know, so we have some background on the property. I guess it's not maybe necessary to go through it all. If you have a clean title, you may not have to go through it, but I think it's always wise to look at all that.
Right. And I believe that we've got a title representative that's going to be coming. I heard that in the rumblings that we've got somebody coming through to explain that process. But just to give you a brief kind of summary behind the scenes, basically, the title is basically who can claim ownership or part ownership to this property. And so title basically wants to make sure before they give an insurance policy for it that they've gone through and that they've checked to see that it's clean, that there's nobody who can come out of the woodwork at the last minute and say, hold on a second, back 20 years ago I did work on the property and I have a lien on it that never got paid, blah 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 blah. So that's kind of even liens, like builders coming in doing work and not getting paid for it can put a lien on a property that affects the title. So that's one of the things they have to look out for.
Things like that, as well as easements that might be on the property
Right.
that you need to know about.
Right. So then I guess what else is left at that stage? Is it just about collecting all the funds?
Basically, we're working towards getting loan documents so that they can be signed and we can proceed with closing. But yeah, before getting to loan documents, if there are any issues with title, if there's any what they call clouds on title that need to be resolved,
right?
You're trying to get those all cleared up so that you're ready to close when loan documents are coming out.
Right. Now, just from a kind of larger philosophical sense, really, escrow is about getting a ledger with two sides to zero out, right? I mean, isn't that really at its heart what escrow's really trying to do?
Yes, making sure all your figures, your numbers are correct, along with the clearance and making sure title's clear. But yeah, you're making sure that all the numbers are correct, and that's
for for one side of the transaction, there's another side that basically cancels it out.
Right.
So in terms of, like, let's say paying off a loan, what's the process for basically the seller has a loan of $300,000 still on their property? How does that get paid off?
So during at the opening, one of the things we ask them is what loans or what mortgages do you have on the property. So the seller will provide us with that information, if there's a first or a second, if there's an HOA, if there's even a water stock company that's involved in the property. You want to get that information fast so that you can order payoff statements and have demands, statements ready to go so that you can close. You can't close without, if you don't have a demand or a payoff statement for a lien that's on title, it can be a big delay, and you'll be in hot
Yeah, I
water
was
on
just
both
about
sides.
to talk about liens. I mean, that's, because there's also probably a legal process possibly behind that as well.
Yeah, possibly. And another thing that we like to get fast is that confidential information statement, so that we can give it to the title company. They can run that information, make sure that there's no hidden liens out there that didn't show up on their
Right.
initial report, because you don't want to have something come up last minute on title where it delays everything. That's a nightmare scenario.
Right. Now, probably the most kind of, well, not to say esoteric, but definitely the kind of the hardest thing to chase down, at least from what I know about the escrow process, are things like property taxes. Like, it's going to end on escrow is going to end on this day, so that means that from this point you owe this much in property taxes, and that you understand what I'm saying. It's
like the proration.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, depending on when the date, whereabouts in the year you are when you're closing, there's going to be a proration or an adjustment for taxes that are due from one side and or a credit to the other.
Right.
So, for example, if we were closing today, we're in the second half of 2016, 2017 taxes, which runs from January 1st of this year till July 1st. So the adjustment there is, if we were closing today, the buyer is going to pay the full second half amount, and then they're going to get a credit from January 1st to today, credit from the seller side, because they didn't own the property for that amount of time.
Right.
They're paying the entire tax bill. They need to be credited back
Right.
for that time that they didn't own the property. So
Right, because it's only fair that
Right.
like we're not going to be in the house, so we shouldn't have to pay the entire
Right.
half of year or whatever.
And Veto, why don't you describe supplemental property taxes?
Sure.
So one of the biggest questions I get
Yeah,
after we close the home is, what is this bill? And
I just got this bill.
Why do I have a property tax bill? Why is it telling me it's due? And why didn't my escrow account pay for it?
Right.
Right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So after you close escrow and you've bought your property, you're going to be getting, it can vary the time frame, but you'll get what's called a supplemental bill from the county tax collector. And basically, when they see a property change hands, a sale take place, they go and reassess the property, so that in their hopes, they'll raise the taxes and there'll be more taxes due.
Right.
So that's going to change the amount of property taxes on the property. That change is going to be the supplemental bill that you're going to have to pay, because you are paying at a certain price and the property's been reassessed at that price. So
Right.
now you're on the hook for those taxes.
And if you have an impound account or an escrow account, just the account that you pre-fill, where every time you pay your mortgage, you're paying your property taxes and insurance, and when you close, you pre-fill it. You think that, well, of course, my escrow account will go ahead and pay for that supplemental bill. And the answer usually is no.
Right.
Right. So you definitely want to budget for it
Right.
after the purchase. I mean, you can certainly call and ask if there's an extra balance available to do that. Call your servicer, your loan servicer. But typically that's something you need to budget for.
Right. The lender doesn't know what the taxes are going to be after it closes. But sometimes there's money remaining in the account. Sometimes there's not. But yeah, typically the homeowner or the buyer is on the hook for those supplemental taxes to pay those.
Yeah, when I close a loan, that's one of the things that I put in there is just a little statement about supplemental property taxes, because I know that I would be getting a call in 2 or 3 months anyway, so
Right.
might as well prep them for it.
Right.
So what other prorations and adjustments might be there? I mean,
If it's an investment property, if there's tenants, if you have rents, there's proration for rents. There can be prorations for, let's see, I'm trying to think of other, it's usually rents and taxes. That's the main
Right.
thing. But HOA dues, if there's an HOA.
right. Would interest on the loan be?
No, not for proration purposes. It'd be rents, taxes, HOA dues.
Got it.
Those are the typical ones.
So, all right, and then kind of to close up here, we're heading towards close of escrow. There's point of sale items. right? So like, look, this is one of the main things that has been the stick in my craw in terms of escrow, and that has been things like the 9A. Basically, these are point of sale items that have not been taken care of because basically look, I've worked with really good escrow companies. I've worked with not so great escrow companies. The not so great escrow companies, and even if they're out of the area and don't necessarily know about different point of sale for the area, right? They don't know that they're supposed
Not an excuse.
Not an excuse, but I've seen it every single time.
Sure.
Like, we explain kind of like what the 9A is, like I'm talking about, and escrow's role in making sure that those things get taken care of way before.
Right. The 9A, which is the city of LA, it's kind of falls under the header of a pre-sale report. And various cities or counties may have these types of pre-sale reports that you need to order and obtain in order to close. And so, for example, for the 9A, the city of Los Angeles, we try to order those right away because
they take so darn long.
It could be a week, which I've seen it come back in a week.
Which is nice. That's a nice one.
Which is very nice. Yeah, very fast. And it could take 2 or 3 weeks. So,
and by the way, when you've got a 30-day escrow, which is kind of like the common, I mean, people are trying to do 40-day, like because of TRID and all that, but it used to be 30 days was kind of like the standard.
Right.
And you're like waiting on day 25 and that 9A has not shown up and somebody didn't hear the starter's pistol on, basically getting out and getting one.
Right.
You're hating life as on the agent side.
Yeah. And escrow does not want to be telling people, hey, I'm sorry, the report's not in, we can't close. You don't want to ever say we can't close, we don't have this or we don't have that.
Right.
You want to get things ordered right away so that you just got to have all your ducks in a row so that you're not the source or cause of any delays.
And that's why I think it's incredibly important to work with if I'm not saying, look, if you find the house of your dreams and all that, and the seller says I'm using X escrow company, and you're like, and you do the research and you find there's really bad reviews and whatever, look, I think it's definitely, you should definitely express your concern when you get into the whole process and the transaction. But at the same point, you really, if you're a seller, I would be working with someone who is reputable so they make the process so much smoother.
Right.
You don't need headaches. You need to be able to sleep at night.
Yes, and I was going to say with these pre-sale reports, no matter where the property is located, it could be in my backyard in Los Angeles County, or it could be up north. It could be anywhere in California. It's incumbent on you, the escrow holder, to find out what you need to get for that property in that location. It doesn't matter if you're not in that area. You have to find out what you need to get in order to close.
And I have to say that for these people who are trying to do for sale by owner, and like I don't want to pay an agent, my percentage, and I don't want to do this fee, and I don't want that fee. If I could literally pick out one single argument why you should not even, other than the fact that an agent is 9 times out of 10 going to get you a better net on your property, but these little gotchas, right, that are going to completely come out of nowhere. And I'll tell you something, that if the other side is using an agent, that agent knows about these things, and they know that, hey, I'm supposed to get retrofit. I know I'm supposed to have a 9A. They're going to get you gotchas.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're the seller, you may be trying to save a few bucks, but you're going to hurt yourself in the long run if you don't trust in an agent that can foresee these things and know about these things. You may think you're going to save yourself some money, but you may end up causing more money and heartache.
Because here's a nightmare scenario, right? So you've got this is an example that I heard about the 9A. Okay, so let's say you were for sale by owner. And this is not a for sale. This wasn't a for sale by owner, but this is something I heard about that happened on a 9A. So the transaction was going through, and everybody was fine and dandy, and we're about to close and all that. All of a sudden, 9A shows up, and they say it's not a duplex; it's a triplex. The 9A says that this is a completely different property than what you think you're buying. That's a disclosure. And if you, at the end of the day, right, if let's say you had closed, let's say you were, a for sale by owner who didn't do the 9A or whatever, and all of a sudden they happen to look at the 9A and they see that your property isn't what you said your property was, you're setting yourself up for liability that you're not even going to, the money that you saved on not paying an agent a commission, you are now going to pay through the nose in a lawyer and any kind of punitive damages that they're going to impose on you. It's just a silly, stupid way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're a professional, if you're an agent yourself.
No, if you're an agent yourself, I'm not talking about those guys, and I totally understand why those guys do for sale by owner. But if you're just, Joe Blow who works, down at the pizza store and you want to sell your house, if there's one argument for not even thinking about it, I think that's it.
Yeah, and there's several, and the 9A is just one of them. But yeah, I think it's always a good idea to trust and pay a commission. It's going to be worth it in the end. So.
Right. So we're getting down to closing, basically, where everybody's all kumbaya. We've done it all the ledgers all match. We're down to zero. And so it's about funding and sending checks, right?
Yeah. Once the buyer signs their loan documents, we give all the documents back to the lender. They review it all. If there's any remaining conditions to fund, we take care of those at that time. There shouldn't be many if you're doing your job right. Which is what I'm
big assumption there, Veto. Big assumption.
That's what I'm used to, is maybe just 2 or 3 conditions. But yeah, you're fulfilling conditions to fund.
We get commission checks.
Right, exactly.
Yay!
Right.
I actually get paid.
So once they fund the loan, you record the next business day, and
now does escrow do the recording, or does title?
Title actually does the recording. Title won't record though unless escrow calls them and or communicates with them and says, hey, please set this up to record tomorrow. Here's your documents. You got to provide everything to title in order to close.
Right.
So, but yeah, escrow, we would be the ones calling title saying, hey, look out for this wire from guaranteed rate. This is towards the purchase of this, and please record tomorrow. So yeah, we need to communicate with the title company to record. They can't just do it on their own.
Got it. And in some states, they'll actually record on the same day.
Right.
So the escrow we closed today, they're recording today as well, and that's in Nevada. So.
Got it. So anything after close, like what? Let's say we're all done and we're in the house. Anything else that you guys do like after the fact?
Not much. By when we close, we have all our final figures. We've dispersed all the funds. We've sent everybody their checks. We've paid, all the various bills that need to be paid. Nothing much really happens after we close, except if I don't know off the top of my head, if the title company sometimes. The title company will say, okay, there's this tax amount of due. Maybe they were off by a little bit, or maybe it was paid and they didn't know it. There was a lag time between the time it got paid and title could actually see that it got paid. Anyway, if taxes are double paid, things like that.
But it's not like you guys disappear into the sunset.
No. I get calls pretty often from clients that have closed a property, and they say, hey, I lost my closing statement. Can you please send it to me? Or I'd like to have this document. We can go back. Everything is stored electronically, so it's easy to go in, grab a copy of something and email it to somebody.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up here, and I just before we get going, if there's, I guess there's, I would assume that there are always times when these go bad. That there's times when it's not so nice. Can escrows be canceled? How does it happen? Like, take us through that if things go wrong.
Yeah, escrows definitely cancel and can be canceled depending on what point you're at in the process. Sometimes you'll lose some of your deposit or all of it. Sometimes you won't lose it at all. It just depends on the circumstances of when you're canceling and why you're canceling. If you haven't signed off on all your contingencies, then typically you'll get your deposit back. But yes, escrows do cancel. We have to draw up a cancellation instruction that both sides sign, and what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought.
I don't know, Veto. I'm not you.
But typically, yes, when an escrow cancels, usually the buyers get their entire deposit back
Right.
if it's within the time frame.
Right. If you haven't released the contingency yet, it gives you contingencies are set up so that they're basically ways that if you release them, and you have to actively, I've talked about this, you have to actively release them. You can't just pass a date and time and all of a sudden that contingency is gone. No, you have to actually say, we release this contingency. If you haven't released that contingency, you basically, you can get your deposit back and
Right.
but each contingency is basically another way for you to stop from going backwards.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
So, okay, great. Any other to leave on a happy note, suggestions that you'd give to anybody who's a buyer or a seller in terms of the escrow process?
Just have whatever documentation that you think is going to be needed if you're a seller, that's going to be needed by the title company. If your property is held in a trust, you want to have a copy of your trust. If there's been a death of a trustee, or if there's been any changes from the time or from the way title is currently held to what it currently is in right now, if there's been any changes at all, you want to let people know, so that we can deal with those and get them rectified, and it doesn't become a problem down the line.
Right.
For buyers, you want to again have all your documentation in line. You want to be in contact with your agent, your lender, and just be informed. And
Yeah. And that's something we always talk about. Be prepared, be informed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what should be reducing the amount of fear that you have going into the process, because this isn't escrow, even though, up until now, hopefully this podcast has given you a little bit of glimpse behind the curtain. So it's not some sort of like weird, mysterious thing that you've always heard about escrow. Before I became a real estate agent, I didn't quite understand what, escrow was really for, but it's really not, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something you can understand very easily. And if you're prepared, you can get through the process lickety-split, no bumps in the road, and it's all the best for you.
Yeah, I always encourage people to call me, email me if you have any questions at all. I'd rather you ask a question and you give me the opportunity to, give you information or help you, rather than kind of being in the dark and being afraid. It's just fear, really. That and there's nothing to be afraid of. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward and
sounds like something somebody has said around here before.
It's pretty much common sense, and it's not as hard as people think.
Well, Veto, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming back again after we screwed up so bad the last time. I really appreciate having somebody with your expertise on. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and it's glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, that's about it for today. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to leave them for us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Clarified Realty Podcast, all one word. You can email me directly at tom@clarifiedrealty.com. For more exclusive bonus content and advice between episodes, please check out our website, www.clarifiedrealty.com. Also on our homepage, you'll find links to helpful buyer and seller guides that can give you some great information for starting your home buying or home seller process. So please check those out. I am on Snapchat, Twitter, and Instagram as well. My handle for all three of those are @Clarified Realty. And please, I beg of you, please leave feedback and reviews on iTunes or in the comment section on our page. My amazing theme song, Hey Now, is from the band Wolf. That's Wolf with 2 F's. And please go like them and check them out on SoundCloud. We'll also leave a link to the song in the credits if we can. They rock so gosh darn hard, I think even Chuck Norris needs to put on earplugs to listen to them. And just a little disclaimer, Ron and I are licensed by the California Bureau of Real Estate. My license number is 01715353. Ron's is?
Guaranteed rate NMLS 2611, NMLS ID 558706, California.
The advice we give is only for properties located in the state of California. For all other states, please contact your local real estate agent or real estate professional. Well, that's about it. Ron, you good?
I'm great, Tom. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming by, everybody. And remember, the greatest thing you can ever do is make someone feel at home. Take care, and we'll see you next week.